Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both our witnesses with their help in our study of this bill. My first question is to Ms. Drydyk. I noted that you operate a hotline, a human trafficking hotline. So could you share with us any data that you have about the extent of human trafficking that is reported to you in this direct way? And how does that correspond to perhaps the data that the government has?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm happy to share the data that we have. Last year, we were able to release a report on human trafficking trends in Canada, where we released data from the first full year of operating the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. In that first full year, and again, that was our very first year of operations, we identified 415 cases of human trafficking that involved 593 individual victims and survivors. But I will also say that the main reason that those individuals reached out to us was because they were looking for access to services. In fact, only 7% of those people that reached out to the hotline wanted anything to do with law enforcement. So while we can facilitate their connection to law enforcement, the real barriers that they're experiencing, and again, this is coming from historical experiences of violence and mistreatment, are very significant. And I can't overestimate the amount of stigma that is also imposed on survivors of sex trafficking, but also those involved voluntarily in the commercial sex industry. It really is one of the last resources that individuals are looking for when they reach out for our support.
So it's fair to conclude from what you're telling us that the numbers that you have are likely the floor as opposed to the ceiling. They're underreported because of many, many reasons.
Yes, and I can say that as we have matured as an organization, I can conservatively say that we have seen at least a 25% increase in call volume since the data that I just spoke to. Mm-hmm. We're still consistently looking at updating our data and being able to share that for public decision makers.
Thank you, Ms. Drydyk. Do I have time for a quick question to Professor Benedet?
Yes, you do.
Professor Benedet, I noted, with interest your comments about the Palermo Protocol being the bar that we should meet, that we are not as far as we should be. Can you tell me if other signatories of the Palermo Convention, other jurisdictions, are closer to the definition, or are we the leaders here, or are we the laggards?
I'd say that's a good question, and in a way, I feel like I would I'd have to maybe update my research a bit to know for sure. But I would say we're probably, I don't know, somewhere in the bottom half, but not right at the bottom. And part of it has to do with the combination of removing that reference to a condition of vulnerability, then putting this very high bar of this reasonable apprehension of fear. Plus, we don't target the buyers directly. We only target the traffickers. And when you put those three things together, those are three weaknesses in my view, and they're not consistent with our objectives under the Palermo Protocol.
So, who's the leader? If we're in the bottom third, which should be shocking for us with our feminist policies, etc., who leads? Who should we be looking at as an example?
Well, I mean, I would say the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, have all recognized, at least in the field of sex trafficking in particular, the relationship between the demand for prostitution and the growth of that industry, and they've made their countries very inhospitable to traffickers by trying to connect those realities and to keep good data, to be enforcing. And it's certainly true that victims themselves may not think of law enforcement as the first place they want to go. That doesn't mean that we don't have an obligation, a state obligation, to punish traffickers. If we don't, they'll just keep trafficking other people. So, there needs to be some law enforcement response. Services are great, but ultimately they're not disrupting the traffickers to the extent that that's really necessary. So anyway, that's what I would say there. And obviously countries like the Netherlands, like Germany, like New Zealand, I would say are right at the bottom in being quite resistant to the idea that that they have any trafficking at all, and that all of this is just really migration for sex work, which I would say is nonsense.
Thank you.
Very much.